Welcome, dear listener, to our quiet corner of the night. Take a deep breath, let the weight of the day fall away from your shoulders, and find comfort in the space you are in. Here, we share stories designed not to excite, but to soothe, not to startle, but to settle the mind. The tales you will hear are gentle whispers of mystery, intended to be a soft companion as you drift towards dreams. If you find solace in these nocturnal journeys, consider subscribing to our channel. It is a simple, quiet way to ensure you never miss an opportunity to unwind with us. Your presence here is valued, and we hope to accompany you on many nights to come. Now, close your eyes, relax, and let our story begin. Tonight, we board the train that arrives at midnight with no destination. The night held a particular kind of stillness. The kind that feels ancient and full of unspoken secrets. For Elara, this stillness was both a comfort and a weight. She worked as an archivist, spending her days in the hushed silence of a grand library, surrounded by the stories of others. Yet her own story felt like a book with missing pages. A quiet ache, a sense of longing for something she couldn't name, was her constant companion. It was this feeling that led her on long, aimless walks after dusk, when the city softened its sharp edges and the sky deepened to a velvety indigo. Tonight, her wandering feet had carried her to a part of the city she had never seen before. A small, cobbled cul-de-sac tucked behind a row of sleeping townhouses. At its end stood an ornate, wrought iron gate she had never noticed before. It was unlocked. A strange, gentle curiosity, unburdened by fear, urged her forward. Beyond the gate was not a park or a forgotten garden, but a single, solitary train platform. It was crafted from dark, weathered wood, and lit by the soft, golden glow of what looked like old gas lamps. There were no timetables, no advertisements, no signs of the bustling, modern world. The air here was different, carrying the scent of night-blooming jasmine and damp earth, a perfume of tranquility. Elara stood there, bathed in the gentle light, feeling as though she had stepped through a veil into a different time. The platform seemed to exist outside of the city's frantic pulse, humming with a quiet energy all its own. She felt no sense of trespass, only a profound sense of belonging, as if some part of her had been waiting to find this place. She checked her watch. It was a few minutes to midnight. As if on cue, a low, resonant hum began to fill the air, not the clamor of an approaching engine, but a sound more akin to a cello's deep, sustained note, down the tracks, which seemed to appear out of the darkness and end right at the platform. A light emerged. It grew steadily, not a harsh, blinding beam, but a warm, inviting glow. From the heart of this light, the train materialized. It didn't roar into the station, it glided, silent as a moth's wing. It was a magnificent, antiquated thing, composed of carriages of the deepest midnight blue, almost black, with fine gold filigree tracing patterns along their sides. The windows were softly illuminated from within, casting oblong shapes of amber light onto the wooden platform. The train came to a stop without a single jolt or screech of brakes. Its presence as natural and serene as the moon hanging in the sky above. For a long moment, Elara simply stared, mesmerized. This was impossible, a dream made manifest, yet it felt more real than anything she had experienced all day. A door on the nearest carriage slid open with a soft, sighing sound, revealing an interior that seemed to be carved from warmth and shadow. She felt a gentle pull, a silent invitation. The ache in her heart, the nameless longing, seemed to quieten, replaced by a single, clear thought. This is where you need to be. Without a second thought, Elara stepped off the cobblestones and onto the wooden platform, her feet moving with a certainty that her mind did not yet possess, and walked towards the open door of the midnight train. Stepping across the threshold of the train was like entering a sanctuary. The air inside was warm and smelled of old, well-loved books, beeswax polish, and a faint, floral scent. Perhaps chamomile. The carriage was even more beautiful than its exterior had promised. The walls were paneled with a dark, rich mahogany, polished to a soft gleam that reflected the gentle light from brass lamps fixed at regular intervals. The floor was covered in a thick, plush carpet that muffled her footsteps, absorbing all sound and leaving only a profound, peaceful quiet. The seats were not arranged in rows but were configured as small, private compartments, separated by etched glass panels that depicted dreamy, pastoral scenes of rolling hills and weeping willows. Each compartment contained two facing armchairs, upholstered in a deep, sapphire blue velvet that looked impossibly soft to the touch. A small, polished table sat between them, a single, unlit candle and a simple brass holder resting on its surface. Elara felt a sense of awe settle over her. This was not a mode of transport, it was a work of art. A moving haven designed for contemplation and peace. She saw a few other passengers already seated in their own compartments, but they were little more than silhouettes against the warm light. An elderly man with a kind face, staring out the window with a faint smile. A young woman, her head resting against the glass, her posture one of utter relaxation. No one spoke. The silence was not awkward or empty, it was a shared, comfortable quietude, a mutual understanding that words were unnecessary here. A figure emerged from the carriage ahead, moving with a slow, deliberate grace. He was the conductor, though his uniform was as timeless as the train itself, a simple, dark woolen coat and a kind face etched with the lines of 1,000 gentle smiles. He didn't carry a ticket puncher or a machine. In his hand, he held a small, antique lantern that cast a warm, flickering light. He approached Elara's compartment, pausing at the entrance. He didn't ask for a ticket. He simply met her eyes, and in his gaze, she saw a deep, knowing calm. He gave her a slight, reassuring nod, as if to say, "Welcome, you are safe here," and she was. The deep-seated anxiety that usually hummed just beneath the surface of her thoughts had vanished completely, replaced by a feeling of profound security. She chose a compartment near the middle of the carriage and sank into one of the velvet armchairs. It was as soft as it looked, embracing her form as if it were made for her. Just as she settled in, a soft chime, like a single note from a crystal glass, echoed through the carriage, with a motion so smooth it was almost imperceptible. The train began to move. There was no lurch, no rumbling of wheels on a track. It felt less like a departure and more like the world outside was simply beginning to drift away. Elara looked out the window, expecting to see the forgotten platform and the cobbled street, but they were already gone. Instead, the train was moving through a landscape of soft, swirling starlight, a river of deep indigo and silver, as if they were sailing through the night sky itself. The journey was unlike any she could have ever imagined. The world outside the window was not a recognizable landscape of towns and fields passing by in a blur. It was a fluid, ever-changing tapestry of dream matter. At first, it was the star-dusted darkness, a tranquil voyage through a silent cosmos where nebulae bloomed in soft pastel colors and distant galaxies spun like silent, glittering pinwheels. The gentle, rhythmic motion of the train was deeply hypnotic, a slow, steady rocking that seemed to sync with her own heartbeat, lulling her into a state of perfect calm. Her mind, usually a hive of anxious thoughts and to-do lists, grew quiet. The silence in the carriage was a living thing, a comforting blanket that enveloped all the passengers in its peaceful embrace. Elara leaned her head against the cool glass of the window, watching the celestial river flow by, feeling the last vestiges of her worldly worries dissolve into the cosmic dust. After a time that could have been minutes or hours, time seemed to have no meaning here. The starscape began to change. The abstract patterns of light and shadow slowly started to coalesce, to take on form and substance. Wisps of silver mist drifted past the window, and through them, Elara could see faint, ghostly images. A towering forest of trees whose leaves shimmered with moonlight. A vast, placid ocean where the waves moved in a slow, graceful rhythm, crested not with foam but with soft, glowing light. These were not places that existed on any map, they were landscapes of emotion. Physical manifestations of peace, nostalgia, and serenity. Elara realized that the train wasn't traveling through a place, but through a state of being. The journey itself was the destination. She watched, captivated, as a range of mountains sculpted from pure amethyst drifted into view. Their peaks shrouded in a soft, low-hanging cloud that glowed from within. A waterfall of liquid silver cascaded down one of the mountain faces, its descent completely silent, adding to the surreal beauty of the scene. She glanced at the other passengers. They were all transfixed by the views from their own windows, each seemingly lost in their own private spectacle. The elderly man she had noticed earlier now had a tear tracing a slow path down his cheek. But his expression was one of profound, radiant joy. The young woman was smiling in her sleep, a look of pure contentment on her face. Elara understood, with a certainty that bloomed from her heart rather than her head, that the train was showing each of them something they needed to see. It was a mirror for the soul, reflecting back not what was, but what could be, what was lost, or what was yearned for. A deep sense of anticipation began to build within her, a gentle excitement. What would the train show her? What landscape was her own soul aching to see? She thought of the missing pages in her life's story, the vague sense of a lost warmth from her childhood. She had no specific memory to cling to, only a feeling. She closed her eyes, not in sleep, but in deep concentration, and focused on that feeling, the ache of a forgotten happiness. When she opened them again, the amethyst mountains had faded, and something new, something achingly familiar, was beginning to take shape outside her window. Before her own landscape could fully form, Elara's attention was drawn to the compartment directly across the aisle. The elderly gentleman, whose name she did not know but whose peaceful aura she could feel, was leaning forward, his hands resting on the small table, his gaze fixed intently on the scene unfolding outside his window. A soft, golden light seemed to emanate from the glass, illuminating his face and making the silver in his hair shine. Elara, out of a gentle curiosity, allowed her gaze to drift towards his window, and for a moment, she could see what he was seeing. The view was no longer the cosmic dreamscape but a specific, sun-drenched scene from the past. It was a small, wooden fishing dock on the edge of a sparkling, blue lake. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows and bathing everything in a warm, honeyed glow. A much younger version of the man, perhaps only a boy of 10, was sitting on the edge of the dock, his bare feet dangling in the water. Beside him sat another man, older, with a kind, weathered face and a straw hat, clearly his father or grandfather. Elara could almost feel the warmth of the sun, smell the scent of the pine trees that lined the lake, and hear the gentle lapping of the water against the wooden posts of the dock. The boy in the memory was holding a simple fishing rod, his expression one of intense concentration. The older man was not fishing, he was simply watching the boy. A look of immense, quiet pride and love on his face. He said something, and though Elara couldn't hear the words, she could see the boy break into a wide, gap-toothed grin. Then, the boy's rod dipped suddenly. His eyes widened in excitement, and with a whoop of joy, he began to reel in his catch. The memory was so vivid, so full of pure, uncomplicated happiness, that Elara felt a warmth spread through her own chest. She was not just observing, she was feeling the echo of the man's joy, the resonance of his cherished memory. This was the healing the train offered. It didn't erase pain. It allowed you to revisit and re-experience the moments of life that had been dimmed by time and sorrow. The scene outside the man's window held for a few more moments, the boy proudly holding up a small, glistening fish, the father ruffling his hair with a loving hand, and then it slowly dissolved back into the soft, swirling mist. The elderly gentleman leaned back in his velvet armchair, closing his eyes. The single tear had dried on his cheek, and the smile on his lips was one of deep, serene fulfillment. He had been given a gift, a chance to dip back into the river of his own life and touch a moment of pure gold. Elara felt a profound sense of gratitude for having been allowed to witness it. It gave her hope. The train wasn't a place of passive observation, it was an active participant in the restoration of the soul. It knew what each passenger carried in their heart and what memory was needed to bring them peace. She turned her attention back to her own window, her heart now open and ready. The mist was thicker now, swirling with purpose, and she knew, with a quiet shiver of anticipation, that it was her turn. The landscape of her own past was waiting to be revealed. As Elara focused on the pane of glass before her, the swirling mists began to part, like curtains opening on a long-forgotten stage. The colors shifted from cosmic blues and silvers to the soft, gentle greens and earthy browns of the terrestrial world. Slowly, an image began to resolve, fuzzy and indistinct at first, like an old photograph left out in the sun. She saw the outline of a white picket fence, a little weathered, with rambling roses climbing over it. She saw the deep green of a well-tended lawn and the dark, rich soil of a flower bed. Her breath caught in her throat. She knew this place. It was the garden of her grandparents' house, a place she hadn't consciously thought about in over 20 years. It was the backdrop to the happiest, most carefree days of her early childhood, before life had become complicated, before the quiet ache had taken root in her heart. Yet, the memory remained tantalizingly out of reach. She could see the shapes and colors, but the details were blurred. The sounds were muted, and the scents were absent. It was like looking at a painting of a place rather than being in the place itself. She could see the large oak tree that stood in the center of the lawn, its branches reaching out like welcoming arms. But she couldn't feel the rough bark under her fingertips or hear the rustle of its leaves in the summer breeze. She could see the stone bench under the tree, but she couldn't feel its cool, solid surface beneath her. A gentle frustration, not the sharp, anxious kind she was used to, but a soft, wistful longing, rose within her. The memory was so close, a ghost just on the other side of the glass, and she wanted desperately to step into it, to feel its warmth and light once more. She pressed her hand against the window, as if her touch could somehow bring the scene into sharper focus. Just then, the conductor, Silas, appeared at her compartment, moving with his signature silent grace. He held a small, delicate porcelain cup on a saucer, steam rising from it in a fragrant, gentle wisp. He offered it to her with that same knowing, compassionate smile. Elara accepted it, her fingers wrapping around the cup's comforting warmth. The aroma that rose to meet her was immediately calming: chamomile, honey, and something else, something fainter, like lavender and mint. Sometimes, Silas's voice was soft, barely a whisper, yet it filled the quiet carriage. A memory needs to be invited, not forced. It must know it is welcome. He gave a small bow and continued his silent patrol down the aisle. Elara looked down at the cup in her hands. She understood his meaning. She had been straining, trying to pull the memory towards her. She needed to relax, to open herself to it. She took a slow, deliberate sip of the tea. It was warm and sweet, and as the liquid flowed through her, it seemed to carry with it a wave of profound peace. The tension in her shoulders eased, and the gentle frustration melted away. She closed her eyes, holding the image of the garden in her mind, and took another sip of the calming tea, extending a silent, heartfelt invitation to the past. With her eyes closed, holding the warm porcelain cup, Elara let the conductor's words and the soothing properties of the tea wash over her. She stopped trying to see the garden and instead focused on simply being. She let go of her desire to control the experience and surrendered to the gentle current of the journey. The rocking of the train, the warmth in her hands, the sweet herbal scent of the steam, it all combined to deepen her state of relaxation, taking her to a place between waking and dreaming, a fertile ground for memory to take root. She took another sip of the tea, and this time, something shifted. A scent, faint at first, then growing stronger, bloomed in her mind's nose. It wasn't the chamomile from the cup, it was the rich, loamy smell of damp earth after a light summer rain. And then another, the sweet, slightly spicy fragrance of her grandmother's prize-winning roses. The ones that grew in a thick, unruly bush by the picket fence. Her eyes snapped open. The view outside the window had transformed. The blur was gone, replaced by a scene of astonishing clarity and vibrancy. It was as if a lens had been brought into perfect focus. The garden was no longer a flat, faded image, it was alive. She could see every individual petal on the deep red roses, some still jeweled with tiny, perfect droplets of water from the recent shower. She could see the intricate patterns of moss growing on the stone bench and the delicate, veined structure of every leaf on the great oak tree. The world outside the window was now hyper-real, more vivid than any ordinary memory. The sound came next, not a memory of a sound, but the sound itself, filtering through the glass as if the window were open. She heard the contented buzzing of bumblebees moving drowsily from flower to flower, the cheerful chirping of sparrows in the branches of the oak, and the faint, distant sound of a wind chime tinkling in the gentle breeze. Elara felt a wave of emotion so powerful it made her gasp. This was it. This was the feeling she had been longing for, the warmth that had been missing. It wasn't just a memory, it was a re-experiencing. She felt the phantom sensation of the soft, slightly damp grass under her bare feet, the gentle warmth of the late afternoon sun on her skin. She was both in the velvet armchair of the midnight train and a small child standing in the heart of this magical, sun-drenched garden. She watched as a younger version of her grandmother, her hair tied up in a colorful scarf, moved through the flower beds, humming a soft tune as she snipped herbs with a pair of shears. The sight of her, so alive and happy, was a balm to a part of Elara's soul she didn't even know was wounded. This single, perfect moment, resurrected by the mysterious power of the train, was already beginning to fill the empty spaces within her. She sat, utterly captivated, watching the peaceful scene unfold, allowing the sensory richness of this rediscovered sanctuary to wash over her and heal her. One precious detail at a time. The real magic, she realized, was just about to begin. The garden of memory was so complete, so immersive, that Elara felt she could stay there forever. She watched her grandmother move towards the house, her basket full of fragrant herbs, until she disappeared inside. The garden was quiet again, bathed in the deepening gold of the setting sun. The air began to cool slightly, and the daytime sounds of bees and sparrows gave way to the first tentative chirps of evening crickets. A deep sense of peace settled over Elara, but she knew, with an instinct she couldn't explain, that the core of the memory, the very heart of the healing she sought, was still to come. She watched the younger version of herself, a little girl with scraped knees and a bright yellow dress, who was now sitting on the stone bench under the oak tree, looking expectantly towards the house. And then, the back door opened, and her grandfather stepped out into the garden. He was a tall, gentle man with kind eyes and a slow, warm smile. In his hand, he carried an empty glass jar with holes punched in its metal lid. The sight of him, so clear and solid, sent a fresh wave of love and longing through Elara. He was the source of the forgotten warmth. He walked over to the bench and sat down next to the little girl, next to her. He didn't say a word, just put the jar down on the bench between them. The little girl, her younger self, looked up at him with wide, curious eyes. He simply smiled and pointed towards the far end of the garden. where the shadows were deepest under a cluster of lilac bushes. As Elara watched, a tiny, intermittent spark of greenish-yellow light blinked in the twilight. Then another, and another. The fireflies were waking up. They hold the last of the day's sunlight, her grandfather's voice said, and Elara heard it not just as a memory, but as if he were speaking in the carriage with her now. The voice was exactly as she'd forgotten. She remembered it, deep, calm, and full of a quiet magic. "We have to be very gentle," he continued, "so we don't frighten the light away." He picked up the jar and stood, holding out his other hand to the little girl. She took it without hesitation, her small hand disappearing into his large, warm one. Together, they walked across the grass towards the lilacs. The memory unfolded like a sacred ritual. Her grandfather showed her how to cup her hands gently around a blinking firefly, creating a small, dark chamber for it, and then how to carefully deposit it into the jar. He was patient and slow, his movements full of a reverence for the tiny, living lanterns. Soon, the jar began to fill with a soft, pulsing, magical light. The little girl's face was a mask of pure, unadulterated wonder, her laughter a soft, tinkling sound that echoed the wind chimes. This was it. This was the memory, the feeling of her grandfather's safe, warm hand in hers, the shared, secret mission in the twilight, the breathtaking magic of the glowing jar. It was a moment of perfect, untroubled joy and unconditional love. It was the missing page, the source of the ache, now found and restored in all its radiant beauty. The scene in the garden held for a long, beautiful moment. Elara watched as her grandfather screwed the lid onto the glowing jar and handed it to her younger self. The little girl held it up, her face illuminated by the soft, magical light of the captive fireflies, her expression one of pure, radiant bliss. This image, this feeling, was the anchor her soul had been searching for. It was a memory of such profound love and safety that it radiated a warmth capable of chasing away years of accumulated chill. Then, slowly, as gently as it had arrived, the image began to fade. The vibrant colors of the garden softened, the sounds of the evening crickets grew distant, and the figures of her grandfather and her younger self became translucent, eventually dissolving back into the soft, swirling mists that flowed past the train window. The garden was gone, but the feeling was not. The warmth remained. A glowing ember settled deep within Elara's chest. The quiet, persistent ache that had been her companion for so long had vanished completely. It hadn't been pushed away or suppressed, it had been healed, filled in by the rediscovery of this perfect, luminous moment. The emptiness was now occupied by the memory of her grandfather's smile, the feeling of his hand, and the magical light of the firefly jar. She leaned her head back against the soft velvet of the armchair and closed her eyes. Not to see another memory, but to simply bask in the profound peace that now permeated her entire being. A single, happy tear escaped and traced a warm path down her cheek. It was a tear not of sadness or loss, but of gratitude and release. She now understood the true nature of the Somnus Express. It didn't have a physical destination because its purpose was internal. It was a vessel of healing, a mobile sanctuary that traveled the landscapes of the heart. It took on passengers who were adrift, burdened by unspoken grief, regret, or a sense of loss, and guided them back to the moments of light in their own past. It didn't offer escape, but restoration. It didn't erase the difficult parts of life, but it reminded you of the beautiful parts, giving you the strength and warmth to carry on. She opened her eyes and looked around the carriage. The elderly gentleman was sleeping soundly, the joyful smile still gracing his lips. The young woman across the way was awake now, looking out her own window with a newfound serenity in her eyes. Everyone on this train, Elara realized, was on the same pilgrimage, a journey homeward to the safest, kindest corners of their own souls. The train itself, with its silent conductor and its velvet seats, was a manifestation of grace, a mystery that didn't need to be solved, only experienced. She held the memory of the fireflies close, a permanent lantern to light her way, feeling whole and anchored for the first time in years. An immeasurable amount of time passed in this state of quiet, contemplative bliss. Elara simply sat, cradling the warmth of her newfound memory as the train continued its silent, smooth passage through the soft, abstract dreamscape that had returned to the world outside her window. The journey now felt different. On the way out, it had been filled with a sense of anticipation and gentle uncertainty. Now, on the return, it was a journey of integration. It was a quiet time to let the healing settle, to allow the rediscovered memory to become a permanent part of her present self. The gentle rocking of the train was no longer just hypnotic, it felt like being rocked in a cradle. A deeply comforting and nurturing motion that solidified the peace within her. She felt no need to see another memory, no desire for anything more. The gift she had been given was more than enough. It was everything. The conductor, Silas, made one final pass through the carriage. He no longer carried the lantern, his work was done. He moved with the same unhurried grace, his presence a silent benediction. He paused at each compartment, not to inspect or to hurry the passengers, but to offer a final, quiet acknowledgement. When he reached Elara, he met her gaze, and this time, his smile was wider, filled with a shared understanding. He gave a slow, deliberate nod, a gesture that conveyed congratulations, farewell, and a gentle blessing all at once. Elara nodded back, her heart swelling with a gratitude so immense that no words could possibly contain it. How could she ever thank someone for giving her back a piece of her own soul? The silent exchange was enough. He knew, he had seen her find what she came for, just as he had seen countless others before her. He was the quiet guardian of these journeys, the ferryman on this river of memory. Slowly, the train began to decelerate. The motion was so subtle that Elara only noticed it when the swirling nebulae outside the window began to move more slowly, their colors deepening as if preparing for the dawn. The deep, resonant hum of the train softened to a barely audible whisper. The journey was coming to an end. A part of her felt a pang of sadness at the thought of leaving this magical sanctuary. But it was a gentle sadness, free of despair. She knew that she couldn't stay here forever. The purpose of the train was not to provide a permanent escape, but to provide the healing needed to return to the world, stronger and more whole than before. She was ready to return. She carried the garden, her grandfather, and the fireflies within her now. They were no longer a forgotten ghost in her past but a living light in her present. As the train glided onward, slowing with infinite patience, Elara took one last look around the beautiful velvet carriage, committing every detail to memory, knowing she would carry the peace of this place with her long after she had stepped off the platform. The first hints of the real world began to bleed back into the view outside the window. The cosmic swirls gave way to the deep, familiar indigo of the pre-dawn sky. Elara could see the dark silhouettes of rooftops and the faint, sleeping shapes of trees. The train was no longer traveling through a dreamscape but through the quietest, most magical moments of the night, just before it surrendered to the day. With the same impossible smoothness with which it had departed, the train glided to a complete stop. There was no jolt, only a cessation of movement, a final, deep silence. Elara looked out and saw the weathered wood of the forgotten platform, illuminated by the same soft, golden gas lamps. They were back. The door to her carriage sighed open, extending the same silent invitation to disembark as it had to board. Elara stood up from the velvet armchair, feeling a strange lightness in her body, as if a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She ran a hand over the soft fabric one last time, a gesture of silent thanks, and then walked towards the open door. Stepping out of the train and back onto the platform was like crossing a threshold back into her own life. But a life that was now fundamentally changed. The air was cool and crisp, filled with the scent of damp earth and the promise of a new day. She turned to look back at the magnificent midnight train. But it was already beginning to fade. Its edges grew soft and translucent. The golden light from its windows dimmed, and the entire train, from engine to final carriage, dissolved into the morning mist, leaving behind nothing but the scent of jasmine and the memory of its passage. Elara stood alone on the platform as the first pale blush of dawn appeared on the eastern horizon. The gas lamps flickered once and went out, their magic no longer needed. She walked to the wrought iron gate and stepped back onto the cobbled cul-de-sac. It looked exactly as it had before. A normal, sleepy city street, giving no hint of the magical portal it had hosted just moments ago. As she began her walk home, the world felt different. The colors seemed richer, the air cleaner. A bird began to sing its morning song from a nearby tree. And the sound was the most beautiful music she had ever heard. The quiet ache in her heart was gone, replaced by the gentle, steady glow of the firefly jar. She was no longer an archivist of other people's stories, adrift in her own. She had found her own story again. And it was a story of love, of warmth, and of light. She didn't know if she would ever find the forgotten platform again, or if the Somnus Express would ever return for her. But it didn't matter. The train had no destination, because it had taken her exactly where she needed to go, home to herself. With a soft smile on her face, Elara walked towards the rising sun, ready for the day to begin.